everyone, Clio here, and today we're looking at the books that I purchased in 2020 but didn't get around to reading within 2020 itself. So I don't think I ever formally committed to this goal, but I did definitely have the intention of reading books that I purchased quicker, of not letting them linger on my shelves but getting around to them quicker. And definitely at the first half of 2020 I did kind of have the intention for myself to finish them all within this year, so to not have any 2020 purchases go over into 2021. So basically in that sense this video is a massive call out. So I think in the totality of 2020 I purchased 48 new books that I hadn't read before. So 48 books that were adding onto my TBR were added in 2020. Let's see how many of those I still have left at this point in time. So these are coming at you in no particular order because I am too lazy to check which months I bought which books in. But so definitely this one is a very recent edition. So this is Arcanum Unbounded by Brandon Sanderson. This is a collection of a lot of short stories that form part of the Cosmere. I have read several parts of this book in reality because it does contain, for example, Edge Dancer, it contains The Emperor's Soul, which are all stories that I already read. I did read A Hope for Elantris at some point in time, so there are definitely elements to this collection that I have already read, but I haven't read all of them, haven't read the entirety of this collection, and so parts of these stories are definitely intended to be read in this year when I'm trying to read the majority of the Cosmere. Next up we have a book that I think I purchased around August. It had been on my anticipated releases for 2020 video. It came out in January, I purchased it in August, and I still haven't gotten around to it, which is very much a shame. And that is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid, which actually ended up getting nominated for the Booker Prize. I have kind of given up on the goal that I initially had of reading the Booker Prize shortlist for 2020. I kind of deprioritized that. It is not part of my 2021 goals, for example. And so in that sense, that aspect of it isn't that important, but I've seen so many people who follow the Booker Prize, people who don't follow the Booker Prize, read this one and fall in love with it. So this is a story about a nanny. It's a black nanny who is taking care of a white child, and at the very beginning of this story apparently she is accused of kidnapping the child when she goes to the grocery store, and that kind of is the backdrop against which the rest of the book unfolds itself. But apparently it's mainly going to give us give us white people a very uncomfortable look at some of our actions maybe, and it's going to discuss performative allyship a lot. Next up we have Strange the Dreamer by Lady Taylor. I'm guessing that I bought this around March or something like that, and so this is a YA fantasies novel in which we're looking at this secret society of Weep, or this lost city of Weep, and our protagonist is a scholar who studies this city, but through circumstances he ends up visiting it. I don't know more about this except that it has very dreamy writing, very beautiful writing apparently, or very whimsical writing. It's part of I was kind of trying to read some of BookTube Babies, BookTube Darling, and these sort of fantasy series that I heard so many people talk about when I joined BookTube, but are kind of from the period in which I wasn't reading that much fantasy anymore. It's kind of the time in which I was at university, and so a lot of my time went into reading classics and into reading literary fiction, so I wasn't as in tune with the fantasy scene at that point in my life, and so I do want to kind of try some of those out. This is Lady Taylor is very much a big name within at least the BookTube world within YA fantasy, so I want to see if this is my cup of tea or not. But I have been having some problems with YA fantasy. I have been having that for the past 7 years or so, and I was actually trying to get back into YA fantasy when I picked up this book. I have since read Six of Crows, for example, and also didn't really like that one, so I've been kind of assuming that probably I won't like this one, but I still want to definitely give it a go, especially since it is on my shelves, of course. Next up we have The Bastard of Istanbul by Elif Shafak. This is a book that I got in a subscription box, in the Books That Matter subscription box. I have previously read 10 minutes 38 seconds in this strange world by Alicia Fuck. I like that one. I have very different experiences with that book. It's kind of book in 3 parts, and the first part was like okay, but it was kind of struggle for me to get through, and then the second part I absolutely love. So we'll see what ends up happening with this one. I don't actually know too much about this one. I think it is one set in Turkey, and like we're kind of very much looking at a women's perspective, and there's this one woman who she had migrated to the US, I think, and she returns, and that kind of stirs up all things within the family dynamic, but I'm not entirely sure about that. Next up we have Actress by Anne Enright. Now this, I will say, I should have been a little bit more wary before purchasing this, I think. I purchased it because I follow Eric from the Lonesome Reader, and he very much loved this book. But I have read an Anne Enright, and I didn't really like that book. And I think Anne Enright falls in with like Irish literature, and I've tried quite some Irish novels, and for some reason they don't resonate with me. There's something about the writing style, about the way in which the story is told, that just doesn't really work with me. I always find it to be a struggle, and a struggle that doesn't pay out for me personally. I know a whole lot of people love Irish literature, so I'm not telling you not to try it or anything like that. But so I have become a little bit more wary, a little bit more uncertain about going into this one, but it definitely still am interested in what this book is going to be about. So it's very much looking at the career of an actress through the eye of her daughter, and the impact that has had on her upbringing, on the way in which the family dynamic worked. So I'm still interested, but I'm also so wary, and that's kind of the problem, that it kind of makes it difficult for me to pick it up. The oldest one on this list would be Orfeo by Richard Powers, which I purchased in January when I was in the UK. So this one is on my January TBR now, and I definitely do want to get around to it, to make sure that I still read it relatively soon, let's say, that it doesn't stay on there for longer than a year. But so in Orfeo, our protagonist is kind of working in this lab, and they are researching music, and some of their research draws the attention of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or of some sort of government agency, and so they have to go on the run, and they're trying to kind of look for their musical influences in order to try and inspire people to fall back in love with music, or for something with the power of music. I'm not entirely sure. I read Richard Powers' Overstory, absolutely loved it, and Richard Powers in the Overstory very much links structure to content, so it very much was the case that the Overstory was about trees, but the structure of the book also recreated the image of a tree. And so I think I've read that it's something that he does a lot of times within his work, so I think we will get a lot of references to music within the structure of this one as well, so I'm looking forward to discovering that for myself. Next we have another one that I got in the Books That Matter subscription box. This was the December book, so this is Delayed Rays of a Star by Amanda Lee Coe. So this is about 3, I don't know whether they're all actresses or whether they are all public figures. One in Hollywood, I think, one in Berlin, and the other one, I'm not sure. The other one I'm not really that sure about, but so it's very much about stardom and the sacrifices that they make. It's talking about how Marlene Dietrich is a bisexual and a cross-dressing bisexual, so it's going to have some interesting elements relating to that. It talks about one of these women is very much in favor with the Führer, for example, so I think it's going to look at this sort of glamorous setting, but also at the sacrifices we make and these sort of like dodgy alliances that we maybe make, but also the way in which we sometimes hide our true self in order to be able to portray what the people actually want to see us be. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting one, but yeah, I got it in December, so I haven't gone around to it yet. Another one that I'm so sad is still on there because I just never seem to prioritize it, and I really do have a strong desire to finally read it, is Meanwhile in Dopamine City by DBC Pierre, which is a book that's going to be looking in on social media, on our current relationship with social media. And this one we're kind of looking at a sort of lower class laborer who he is in sole care of his daughter, but one day his daughter really starts to feel like she needs a smartphone. She needs a smartphone in order to be able to keep up with, the life of a teenager nowadays in order to be able to fit in with what teenagers these days are doing, in order to be able to stay in touch with her friends the way that they are all able to do because of the use of a smartphone. So after a while he finally gives in and he buys her a smartphone, but when he does, he starts to lose connection with his daughter because he feels like his daughter is just constantly locking herself up in her room and not really spending her time with him anymore. So it's definitely going to be looking in on that father-daughter relationship, but also on the strain that is put on our sort of like physical connections through the pervasive presence of social media in our lives. Next up, a non-fiction, and that is Cleopatra by Alberto Anceli. So I have a big fascination with ancient Egypt, always have had. So when I was 10 years old, we also went to Egypt. So definitely that fueled my passion for ancient Egypt. And so in recent years, I definitely started to feel like I want to dive into that subject a little bit more, because it's something that as a child I was always super interested about. But then when I went to like in my late teenage years, or when I went to university and things like that, I kind of stopped really seeking out content related to ancient Egypt. So I do want to dive into that subject matter a little bit more again. Next up, another one that I've put on my January TBR, and that will be A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. So this is another one of those super popular books on BookTube that I actually did see around that time when I said that I wasn't really reading all that much fantasy. It is a book that caught my attention because of the beautiful cover, and then I also had a colleague who read it and really loved it, and so I did have it on my radar at some point in time. But you know, there's definitely been a big part of my there's definitely been a couple of years in there that I didn't really read all that much fantasy, and so I didn't get around to reading this one. But so I do want to try it out now. I also have not read a V.E. Schwab yet, so this will be my first one. We'll see how I get along with it. Even if I don't get along with it, I think I still want to read The Invisible Life of Audre Lorde, because that sounds like it's going to be right up my alley. In terms of what the story is about, don't really know. It is about parallel Londons. I think one of the Londons doesn't have magic anymore, and I don't really know what the differences are with the other parallel Londons. So there are 4 Londons: Red London, Black London, Grey London, and White London? I don't know. And we have a world hopper, so I think it's like an urban fantasy with world hopping, which I always like to see, so we'll have to figure out more as I go through it. Next is another gift that I got for Christmas, and that will be Glass Town by Isabel Greenberg. So this is a sort of graphic novel that dives into the Brontes, so the Bronte sisters, but also their brother Bramwell, I think, and it's kind of looking at this fictional world that they created. I think most of the Brontes had a sort of combined fictional world. I don't think every single Bronte wrote their story within that world, but they did have this sort of combined and shared fictional place, and so this book is going to dive into that. It has an interesting art style, and I do definitely want to dive into it as I've been reading more of the Brontes recently, and I do want to learn more about these women and about their brother Bramwell, who's always forgotten when it comes to the Brontes. Next up, we have Congo by David van Rijbroek. If you've been following this channel, you know that this is the shame of my 2020 year, because I don't know how many times I mentioned it, and I definitely put it on a couple of TBRs towards the end. It was also on my December TBR. It's the one book on my December TBR that I didn't end up getting around to. It is also relatively thick, but so I'm from Belgium, and Congo used to be a colony of ours, and so I definitely want to learn more about the history of Congo itself, but also of our presence in there, and of, you know, what happened to Congo after we left. It is a subject that we learn a little about in school, but really not a whole lot, and probably not a whole lot about the real extent of the damage that we did there, or the trauma that we left behind to that region. So it is a book that I definitely want to read. It was a bestseller here in Belgium about 10 years ago when it was published, and so didn't hop on the bandwagon back then, but I definitely do want to catch up now. And then the final one that is on there is also on my January TBR, and that is The Inland Sea by Madeleine Watt. This is also one that I got in the Books That Matter subscription box in the month of November. And so this is going to be tying in with climate change, which is a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. So we're looking at this girl whose great-great-great-grandfather or something like that. He was looking for a sort of mythical inland sea at the center of Australia, but he never found it. And so we're looking at this story from the perspective of his great-great-great-granddaughter, who's very much a sort of person who has lost her way. She doesn't really know what she wants in life. She doesn't really know how to like get her life together, and that's basically all I know about the story. So I'm kind of hoping that we're either gonna have like dual timelines and we're gonna look at her and her great-great-great-great-grandfather, and then hopefully she will go back in pursuit of that inland sea herself. But so yeah, these are the ones that I still have left. So that means that I have 13 books left that I've purchased in 2020, but I didn't get around to reading in 2020. Like, it is less than a third of the books that I purchased. However, I still think that I would have been so much more happier if I could have gotten it under 10 books at the very least. I definitely do still intend to try and do this goal again in 2021. I don't think I've perfectly set down that I need to finish all of them within 2021, the way that I also didn't do in 2020, but it's definitely a lot more present in my mind. But definitely I'm also just have a system in place that's hopefully going to prevent me from buying a lot of books in 2021, which hopefully will naturally result to me finishing most of them within 2021 itself. But so yeah, let me know down below if you've read any of those books and which ones I should prioritize. Is there any sort of book that you purchased in 2020 that you really wanted to get around to, that you purchased thinking that you would pick it up immediately, that's still there on your shelves? Definitely let me know as well. But so yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video and see you guys for a future one. Bye!